conversation around statues and memorials towards people from the past. In the US and the UK, men who traded in slaves or committed acts of racism or colonized certain areas have now been, the people have torn down those statues. We've seen big conversations here in the last few years about statues involving people like, for example, President Paul Kruger or Cecil John Rhodes. At the University of the Free State this week, a statue of the former President of the Free State Republic, M.P. Steyn, has been taken down. Professor Tshilidzi Marwala is the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Johannesburg. He's been writing about this week. Professor, good afternoon. Writing about it this week, I should say. Professor, good afternoon to you. You've said that statues of... Thank you. You've said that statues of people like this should be removed or taken down. Why do you say that?
Well, basically I say that because if the statue is offensive, I will give you an example. You would agree with me that a statue of Adolf Hitler has no place in any civilized society. And such statues must be taken to the museum because statues that are in the public spaces are symbols of celebration and praise. So if, for example, in the United States, the Confederates were people with quite a horrible past, why should that statue be celebrated?
I wonder if sometimes the difference here is the difference between remembering someone, remembering what they did, so in other words, our history, and honouring someone. Let me give you an example. If you go to some cities of the world, older cities perhaps, they will often have a little dot outside or a brick or a little something that will say, this person lived here. I mean, if you go to London, the classic example is that Charles Dickens stayed here and wrote a book here, or some historical figure did this here, or there was a meeting here. It's just a little sign that this happened. But a statue, to my mind, honours someone. So the statue of Cecil John Rhodes at the University of Cape Town, for example, is saying this was a good person, this is why we built a statue. Is that the difference for you? The difference between commemoration and celebration?
Absolutely. Statues are mainly for celebration, and honoring. And that is why if you check, many people who have statues, they would have been heads of states, they would have been famous people who are known for having contributed to society in one way or another. So now if a statue, and I have to put it up front, that there is no such a thing such as a perfect human being. So if we are only going to honor people who are perfect, then there won't be anybody to honor. I think as a society, we must have a criteria on how much bad we are willing to absorb in deciding whether somebody has to be honored by a statue or not.
Let me give you an example of that. Now, here's a person who was flawed, but maybe important, right? So, and it's a difficult case, perhaps. The statue of Louis Botha outside Parliament, right? He's the first leader of South Africa as a nation state. I think that's important. The first person who led South Africa as a nation state. But he also signed the Land Act into law in 1913. I mean, I don't know if we commemorate someone who did that, even though he was the head of South Africa as a nation state, the first head of South Africa as a nation state. I mean, there'll be cases like him that are even more difficult.
Exactly. I mean, Bentham actually puts it very well. There's a concept called utilitarianism, which is bringing the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of people. So I think that is the criteria that we need to apply here. Does the statue of this particular person brings the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of people? And I think we can be able to come to a decision if we use a criteria such as this.
There is a risk that conversations like this are used by politicians. So in the United States, this is happening now. The Confederate generals, I mean, people who literally fought to defend slavery, I mean, these people have military bases in the United States named after them. Donald Trump is supporting that those names stay, because that helps him politically. The same thing can happen in other places. People will often say, let's put up a statue of this person because it wins them support. Where I'm trying to go with this is, how would we as a conversation how would we as a nation have a proper conversation about which statues stay and which statues go? So I think we would all probably keep the statue of Nelson Mandela at the Union Buildings, but would there be other people who we would all agree to keep?
Well, I mean, I suppose these are difficult questions, and absolutely it will depend on literally how many people are offended by a particular statue. If very few people, if the minority of people are offended by a particular statue, then perhaps it should be there. But if the overwhelming majority of the population are offended by a particular statue, that is when you have to engage a process. We are not saying the statue must be destroyed. We are saying that there are places for such statues where we can be able to learn about them. The museum is an example of this. Museums are there to show us about what happened in history. So I suppose what I am saying is that let us think through all this and decide, depending on the number of people who are offended by a particular statue.
I worry that no one in government is actually having this conversation and that nothing's really changing. I mean, the University of the Free State, your colleagues there, had to take their own decision to remove that one statue of M.T. Steyn this week. I don't know if you're aware. I mean, I don't know if there are any statues left on your campuses that you may worry about. But I don't know if government's leading a conversation on this at all.
Absolutely, but I think as South Africans, we need to have a new form of engagement. This idea that important issues have to be led by government is actually quite flawed. I believe that we have leaders in every sector of our population. We have leaders in companies that have statues of people in those companies. We have leaders in academia, and they have statues there. I think this is a conversation that has to be across the board. It has to be inclusive, and it has to get all the key stakeholders on the table. But government should not necessarily be the leader of this. Every one of us can contribute to this conversation.